It was a Saturday night, and my parents decided they wanted to have a night out by themselves. I was 13 at the time, and they believed it would be safe if I was to spend a few hours alone that night. I was warned by my mum to not open the door for anyone, and to not leave the house at all while they were away. About an hour after they had left, I was relaxing on the couch watching a low-budget action film that I eventually became bored from just 20 minutes into it. In fact, it was so boring that I actually began drifting to sleep. However, at about 8 PM, I was awoken by the sound of the doorbell ringing. Who would be ringing at this time? I asked myself. It was too early for my parents to be home, as they had only been out for an hour. I quietly made my way to the door, avoiding the window so I wouldn't be seen. Who is it?
Would you like to make a donation today?
It didn't make sense. Collecting donations? At 8 o'clock? Plus, the man didn't even say what charity or organisation the donations were for. It couldn't be a child playing some prank either. It was the voice of a grown man. No thanks, I said, stumbling on my words. I stood there for 5 seconds, complete silence on the other side of the door. Then suddenly, I heard a loud banging on the door, startling me in the process.
Open the fucking door!
My jaw dropped as he said this, and I ran to the living room, hiding behind the couch. The doorbell was then pressed repeatedly for 10 whole seconds before it finally stopped. I called my mum, and she told me that she was heading for home right away and to immediately call the police. The police said there would be 5 minutes, and it was the longest 5 minutes I've ever waited in my whole life. By the time they arrived, there was no one in sight. I explained everything that happened, but unfortunately I hadn't seen the man, so I couldn't give any description. My parents arrived home, and I had never felt so relieved in my life. The police did contemplate the idea that it could have been a child pulling a prank, but I know myself that it was something much more than that. The voice I heard on the other side of the door was for sure that of a full-grown man. I still wonder what could have happened if I had opened that door. I was 16 at the time of this incident. I arrived home after a long day at school and was pleased to see that my parents were not yet home. I loved the privacy and freedom of being home alone, as I felt like I could do anything I wanted, and I just simply enjoyed the peacefulness. I made myself a snack and started playing this new computer game that I was obsessed with at the time. About 2 hours into my gaming, I heard the noise of the garage door opening. But something wasn't right. The door was electronically operated and would always make a certain noise as it opened the whole way up. But this noise was just a singular thump, like it had been forced open and then just released. Now keep in mind, my room was upstairs, so I could barely hear this noise coming from downstairs, especially considering I had earphones in too. So I told myself that maybe I was just mishearing things. But then I heard the sound of the door that led to the garage being opened, followed by slow, heavy footsteps. I thought that my dad must have arrived home, but he was usually an hour later than this, and it couldn't have been my mum, because she wasn't supposed to be home until about 10 o'clock tonight. I heard the footsteps leading to the kitchen, and I got out my phone and texted my dad, asking him if he had just entered the house. About 30 seconds later, he responded. What he said sent the coldest shiver down my spine. He said he was still at work and would be another hour. My body went numb. I now had no idea who was downstairs. I then heard drawers being opened and footsteps continued through the house until they started becoming louder, heading for the bottom of the stairs. My dad told me to call the police, and I hid in my closet, attempting to make as little noise as possible as I began dialing for the police. The footsteps then started again, slowly and heavily, heading up the stairs. I managed to tell the police my situation in the quietest voice possible, and they said they'd be within 5 minutes. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and started becoming closer, stopping right outside my room door. I heard the creak of my door opening, and the only noises I could hear was my heart thumping in my head and my loud breathing. All I could do was cover my mouth and hope that the intruder wouldn't open the closet door. I heard my drawers being pulled open and things falling onto the floor. Then there was complete silence. It was so silent that I almost thought the person wasn't even in the room anymore. Then I heard it, clear as day. The laugh of a man, probably middle-aged, coming from right outside the door. I felt like I was going to throw up. Tears began forming in my eyes as the laugh continued, and I felt like my body was completely frozen. I had no idea what to do. Trying to calm myself, I thought through my options within a matter of seconds. Could I burst open the door and attempt to make a run for it? I had no idea how big this man was, though, and whether he was armed with a weapon. Surely it was too risky. The laughing of the man suddenly stopped, and once again, the room was completely silent. The silence seemed to last an eternity, before I was startled by loud thumping on the closet door, followed by the man's laugh once again. I began to cry, thinking over my entire life and whether I would ever see my family again. The banging lasted about 20 seconds before it stopped, and all I could hear was the sound of footsteps quickly making their way down the stairs and through the front door. I couldn't bring myself to leave the closet until I heard the sound of the police arriving at my front door. I raced down the stairs, and I honestly have never felt so relieved in my life. I told them everything I could, and they concluded that it just must have been some regular house burglar. My dad arrived not long after, and I threw myself into his arms like I hadn't seen him in years. As it turned out, multiple valuables, such as my mum's jewellery and spare cash, had been stolen. The man was never caught, and it still unsettles me to this day to know that the man could come back anytime. This occurred when I was 20 years old and still living with my parents. One Friday night, I was spending the night alone, as my parents were going out to see a movie. I spent most of the night in front of the TV, flicking through the channels and eating unhealthy snacks. At about 10:30, I was feeling pretty exhausted and decided it was time to go to bed. I brushed my teeth and I headed for my bedroom. As I was about to switch off the light, I noticed my cupboard was open slightly, which I thought was unusual considering I didn't remember opening it that night. I passed it off as me being forgetful and closed it shut, switching off the room light and laying down on my bed. From what I remember, I fell asleep virtually straight away. However, it didn't last long, as I woke up about 20 minutes later, not to any noise or disruption, but something didn't feel right. I rubbed my eyes and lifted my head, trying to see through what was basically a pitch black room. As I scanned the room, my jaw dropped as I saw the cupboard door was wide open, and through my peripheral vision, I could see the outline of a dark figure standing in the corner of the room, facing me. I screamed, louder than I thought I ever could. I shot up out of my bed and raced to the room door. Before I even knew it, I was out the front door, heading for the neighbours. I spammed their doorbell and I knocked on their door endlessly until they answered. I leaped in as soon as they opened it and tried my best to explain the situation through shortness of breath and shock. They locked all the doors and called the police, then my parents. From what I remember, my parents and police arrived at almost exactly the same time. They searched the house, but as expected, whoever was there was long gone, out of sight. Nothing was found in my cupboard or anywhere else in the house. Today, there are still so many unanswered questions going through my head. How long was that person inside our house, and especially in my cupboard? But more importantly, what intentions did that person have? I checked my cupboard every night for a while after that, and I'm always paranoid that no matter where I am, there is always someone watching me.
Someone's always watching me. Someone's always there. When I'm sleeping, he just waits and he stares. Someone's always standing in the darkest corner of my room. He's tall and wears a suit of black, dressed like the perfect groom.